Good evening, and on behalf of the William Hannon Library, it has been a long, hot, and lonely summer, and we are so excited to welcome you to the new year of Faculty Pub Night, where we showcase some of the best and the brightest faculty research at LMU. My name is Rhonda Rosen, and I am the Programming and Exhibitions Librarian, and along with my colleagues in the Outreach and Communications Department, we are delighted to see so many of you here tonight. Our special guest, Dr. Zhang Yang, or Joy E, is the assistant professor at the School of Education, and she will be discussing her recent publication, Schools Under Siege: The Impact of Immigration Enforcement on Educational Equity. After Dr. E's presentation, I will have a one-on-one conversation, or actually tonight, I'm happy to say a two-on-one conversation, because her co-author, Dr. Patricia Gándara, will be here with her for our conversation. After that, we will open it up to questions from the audience. And speaking of questions, if you have a question for our speaker tonight, you are welcome to submit it by using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. All questions will be compiled by our outreach team and submitted to our speakers as time permits. Before we start our program, I wanted to let you know that we will be recording this evening's presentation, and it will be available soon on the library's YouTube channel. I would like to give our land acknowledgement before we start our program. It is important to note that we are welcome guests onto land that is not ours. We sit tonight on the unceded lands of the Tongva peoples, who in the face of ongoing settler colonialism, continue to claim their place and act as steward of their ancestral lands as they have for the past 8,000 years. These lands reach from the Pacific Ocean, where we stand today, as well as into what is now San Bernardino County. The whole of the Los Angeles Basin is unceded territory. I would ask you all to take a moment and spend a minute thinking about what it would mean to take responsibility for one's presence on stolen land. I also encourage you to learn more about the history of the land where you sit by going to native-land.ca. And we will be putting that link up. In fact, it's already up. So tonight we are delighted to invite the co-author of tonight's book, Dr. Patricia Gándara, who will introduce Dr. Joy E. Dr. Gándara is Research Professor of Education and co-director of the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. She is an elected fellow of the American Educational Research Association and the National Academy of Education. In 2011, she was appointed to President Obama's Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and in 2015 received the Distinguished Career Award from the Scholars of Color Committee of the American Educational Research Association. She's been a fellow of the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center in Italy, the French American Association at Sciences Postgraduate Institute in Paris, and an ETS fellow at Princeton in New Jersey. She has written or edited 8 books and published over 150 articles, chapters, and major policy reports. Take it away, Dr. Gándara.
Well, thank you very much, Rhonda, for that introduction. I want to add something, though, that makes this kind of special for me. Something that was not mentioned was that in 2014, the School of Education at LMU honored me with Educator of the Year. And so I feel like I have a bit of a special tie with LMU, and I'm especially happy to be here tonight to introduce Jung-Yoon E, who was first my student at UCLA, then was our postdoctoral scholar at the Civil Rights Project that I co-direct. And finally, here as a professor at LMU, she is my colleague, working together on the book that she is going to describe. There are many lovely things I could say about Joy, and I usually call her Joy, not only because it's easier than Jung-Yoon, but because she is a joy. Joy in 2015 won the National Association of Bilingual Education Award for the outstanding dissertation that year. So she was off to a very strong start. Since that time, she's authored and co-authored at least a couple dozen articles and policy reports that have really put her on the map. Joy has been cited and quoted by the New York Times, by the Washington Post repeatedly, by Ed Week, and a number of other major national publications. She's a known quantity. So given that she's already such a star, and already I knew that she was such a joy to work with, it's no question that I want to write this book with her. Like everything else, it has been a joy and a pleasure to work with her. I just want to say one word about this book before I turn this over to Joy. And that is, why would we want to write this book? Actually, it's quite personal at one level. It's objectively researchable and of interest, we think, for policy. But it's also personal because Joy is an immigrant, and I'm the daughter of an immigrant. But mostly, this book came about because we had seen and read the terrible plight of so many immigrants over years, but little to no attention to the students in the schools caught in the terrible crucible of immigration enforcement. These young people and their schools were invisible. We wanted to make them visible. So Joy will now describe how we went about doing that. Joy?
Oh, thank you, Dr. Gándara, for the amazing introduction. I'm really touched. To me, Dr. Gándara has been my mentor for the past 10 years. She inspires me every day about the possibilities and the imperatives of educational research. I also want to say thank you to Rhonda, Carol, John, and the Hannon Library team for organizing this event. I came to know that it takes several months to prepare for this kind of event, which not many people realize. So I want to appreciate everyone working so hard to make this event happen. And I also want to thank you everybody for joining this event tonight. I really appreciate it. So to get started, I want to share my slide first. So give me 1 second and bear with me. Yeah, I think it should be on there. Okay, today's presentation title is the same as the book title Dr. Gándara and I co-edited, which is Schools Under Siege, the Impact of Immigration Enforcement on Educational Equity. As this title shows, I'd like to talk about our book today. But to get started, I want to explain some background information of this book project. And I also want to briefly introduce my positionality and my identity when I was working on this book study. So to do that, I need to rewind the time to 2016 and 17 when I was affiliated with the UCLA Civil Rights Project as a postdoctoral scholar. And it was the time when the heat wave of 2016 presidential election campaign was sweeping the nation from West Coast to East Coast. The election campaign and the result divided many American communities over race, ethnicity, and culture when it comes to numerous issues. And one of the most critical topics was immigration. Former President, Mr. Trump, and his team made it clear during his campaign that he would change immigration policies and laws substantially, signaling punitive and aggressive approaches in advance. Not surprisingly, this is a list of news article headlines covered in New York Times just in January 2017, when Mr. Trump took office in Washington, D.C. And at the time and afterwards, a lot of attention went to what's happening at the border, and much was written about the plight of immigrant and refugee families under the Trump administration's harsh immigration enforcement policies, including separation of families, caging of children, and denial of basic services. At that time, what we also heard from the media almost every day was incredibly derogatory and offensive comments against immigrants, such as criminals, invaders, rapists, drug dealers, and even animals, just to name a few. And very unfortunately, it was the nation's leader who made those comments in public, which were more likely to be impactful than anyone else in the country. Concurrently, what was happening in our communities was incredibly devastating. Stepped-up immigration enforcement activities, such as ICE raids, hit many immigrant communities. The problem was that those ICE activities targeted many hardworking people with no criminal records whatsoever. And these people have lived here and raised their US citizen children for decades, like Mr. Abelica Gonzalez.
My dad, he's always like worked and everything for us. Even he always wanted us in sports. He wanted us with good grades. It was always, you have an A, you're gonna get rewarded. He's just an amazing dad.
So when I came to know this event, the first reaction was a shock, leaving a huge exclamation mark in my mind. And later on, it evolved to a question, leaving no answers though. This issue came to me in different ways because I'm an immigrant scholar myself. I felt immensely insecure and vulnerable for many decades, for many years, because I was supposed to maintain my legal status on a regular basis. And I also have family members and friends in many parts of the nation having different immigration experiences and challenges over decades. So I found this issue very personal. It was not just an individual case, it can't be. It was the issue that every immigrant deeply related to in their own ways. At the same time, I'm an education scholar, and I wondered how students like Fatima Abelica Gonzalez and her classmates and friends were affected by this kind of ICE race and how they were doing in classroom. I also wondered how school communities in general were affected by this. Finally, I'm a teacher educator. I know some of my students are here today. Since I joined the LMU in 2018, I have worked with educators in different sectors, from traditional public schools, Catholic schools, and charter schools. Most of them work in Los Angeles' most challenging communities where the majority of community members are immigrants and people of color. And this is what my students are dealing with every day. So I found this issue deeply tied with me in many ways. And I felt both personal and professional obligation and commitment as I was working onto this topic. Going back to the impact, around that time, we already heard numerous anecdotes from educators we knew about how shaky and anxious their immigrant students felt at that time. Well, nevertheless, a lot of people simply don't know we have so many immigrant students who are at risk of being directly affected by our broken immigration system. Many people also don't understand how extensive and comprehensive the repercussions can be. So here's the statistics. There are approximately 6 million K-12 children and students. 6 million K-12 children and students who live with undocumented family members. And in a large context, we have about, looking at one statistics more. We have about 17.8 million immigrant students. And I want to underscore the fact that the absolute majority of them closely 90%. They are US citizens. And for those who are undocumented, numerous individuals study and work benefiting from the DACA program. And when it comes to DACA students, as of now, we have about 590,000 children and youth under the age of 18 who are in that program. And nearly 1/3 of them live in California. So it's not uncommon for us to live and work with these DACA students, DACA professionals, and DACA essential workers. We do have these dreamers on our campus here at LMU and in my class as well. So with these statistics in mind, I want to emphasize that the primary focus of our book that centers around the impact of harsh immigration enforcement actions on the majority of US citizen children. We are not talking about what's happening at the border, as well as refugee children or asylum seekers. They deserve the appropriate and sufficient amount of attention in different ways. But what we are focusing here is children and students in our communities and schools. So in our book, we wanted to make these students visible and their voices heard through our research. Because in many cases, they're kind of hidden in the blind spot of our society. And the other objective we had in mind was to use our research findings to advance discussions around immigration and immigration policy reform. And hopefully I can come back to this topic again if we have more time later. Okay, with that in mind, here is the overarching question we posed in our study. How are students, parents of students, and educators affected by stepped-up immigration enforcement activities? We also have a specific questions for each chapter, and I don't want to go over too much here for each chapter for now, but I'm sharing a few questions from some chapters. And this is the table of contents showing primary topics for each chapter. And going back to the question, if I needed to answer to the question in just 2 words, I would say it's a collateral damage because it has affected many communities in a complex way at the individual level and the institutional levels at the same time, including students, immigrant parents, educators, as well as schools and districts as collective agencies. So to explore what was going on in our schools, we collected our own data from educators across the nation. Since it was an ongoing issue, we couldn't use the administrative data that were available at that time because the administrative data always reflect the previous year's information. However, by collecting our own data, we were able to investigate how and the extent to which escalated immigration enforcement actions hit our school communities in different ways. So we benefited from both quantitative and qualitative data so that we could corroborate and triangulate our findings. We distributed a nationwide survey to document educators' observations and perceptions about what's happening in the classroom and among their students and their parents. And luckily, more than 3,600 educators from over 760 schools across the country took part in the survey. Additionally, we collected open-ended comments. We also interviewed educators having different roles, including classroom teachers, English learner coordinators, principals, counselors, and superintendents as well. So if we have more time later, I'm happy to come back to the data part to explain more details, but you can find the specific information in our book. So let me jump into the findings for now. This background image shows the word cloud we presented in our book. We created this by using educators' comments in our data. And as you can see, the most repeated words reflect students' concerns about their family members, and their fear about deportation and family separation due to the ramped up immigration enforcement actions. So this bar graph shows kind of an overview of the quantitative data we collected. Actually, this bar graph delivers much information. The left side of the bar graph shows our survey topics, including the 4 major areas, like students expressing psychosocial stress, academic challenges, school/classroom climate, and parental involvement. The graph also shows the percentage of educators who observed each topic, which is a gray bar, and the black bar shows the percentage of educators who perceived it as being a lot or extensive based on the 5-point Likert scale we used. Since I can't share all the findings, I want to highlight one area we found critical, which is students expressing concerns and fears. A remarkably high percentage of educators noticed this issue. Over 80% of educators reported their students were expressing concerns, and students were experiencing behavioral or emotional problems. But I don't think these numbers reflect devastating stories and challenges many students and educators went through. In our data, actually, thousands of educators left their comments, and I want to share, what they experienced and observed about this. So to get to the bottom of the stories, I'm sharing just a few comments here. One California high school teacher says, I had one student who came back the day after prom and would not eat or talk to anyone. I finally found out from one of her friends that she came home from prom to find her mom deported, and she never had a chance to say goodbye or anything. On a similar note, one Maryland teacher says, we have one student who had attempted to slit her wrist because the family has been separated and she wants to be with her mother. Many students, including young children, they're supposed to become caregivers for their younger siblings. And as this Midwestern counselor shares, students have worried about how to care for their younger siblings after their mother has been deported. And apparently, because of these traumatic experiences, whether direct or indirect, a lot of students have gone through emotional turbulence, such as extreme anxiety, stress, and depression. And as a result, this pressure has interfered students' academic performance, motivation, and also it has increased absenteeism. As this high school administrator in Tennessee says, they are not thinking about college or the test next week, or what is being taught in the classroom today. They're thinking about their family, whether they will still be a family. On a similar note, an educator in Oregon states, I have students who were college bound, now questioning if it's worth it. Students now, they are thinking about just working to protect their families. And when ICE raids happened, or if there is a kind of a rumor about community-wide ICE actions, even though it's not true, a lot of immigrant students simply didn't go to school. And as this New Jersey administrator says, the kids are scared, and sometimes they hide for days when there are immigration raids in the area. So this series of far-reaching incidents has exacerbated the school climate as well. Students have expressed concerns that they are living in a country that does not want them, does not see them, and that wants them gone. They fear they are targets because of their names, their skin color, their accent, their status. They worry they cannot trust anyone. that is shared by a teacher, high school teacher from Northeast. On a similar note, another elementary school teacher from Maryland says, my students and their parents have pride when with me. They fear they are not welcome in our school and in our town. And I have more comments showing the extreme cases, including racist slurs, microaggressions, bullying, physical and mental, emotional. But I won't read everything here because it's so painful. And as you have seen so far, this is what educators needed to deal with almost every day. And not surprisingly, they felt overstressed, overworked, and didn't know whom to trust in their community or in their school. And as this comment shows, educators have been remarkably anxious and stressed because of the work and the things they need to deal with on a daily basis. And to take on multiple layers of responsibilities, they're supposed to work more and stay up late. They're tired and exhausted. And the most painfully, they reported a deteriorating sense of trust among their colleagues, as this comment shows. Well, although what I have presented so far delivers a really dire part of our findings, we do have hopes and optimism in our findings as well. And despite all the challenges educators have faced, we found them feeling more committed. And it doesn't have to do with the red versus blue split in the political arena. We have found so many real heroes and heroines working hand in hand with immigrant students and families. And actually, an educator from a community that just experienced an ICE raid in April 2020 shared this picture with us. They held an event for community leaders and educators to discuss how to help students and families affected by the ICE raids. And in fact, a lot of people supported the previous administration's immigration policy. They didn't know that it could affect their neighbors and community members, like this comment shows. I thought it was just the criminals and things like that. That's what the person thought. And she continues, we all live in the Bible Belt. It's like, love your neighbor. Many school leaders and district leaders, again, whether they are in red state or blue state, they were committed to ensuring safety and support for students as they went through the most extreme circumstances in terms of ICE actions and threats. And as these comments show, my philosophy is, let's just remove the adults from the picture. Let's just do good things for kids. I just keep the focus on the kids. It's all about the kids. And working with community-based organizations and churches is a key to supporting immigrant students and families, because there is more trust and rapport in place between those organizations and immigrant families. We heard a lot of the wonderful stories about how those collaborations happened and helped immigrant students and families in a tangible way. And this is some kind of the example comments we got. And as we documented, these comments, actually, we documented and interviewed educators right after the nationwide lockdown had begun. sometime around April and May of 2020. And as you can see, in many parts of our communities, numerous educators, community-based organization members, and church members worked so hard to offer immediate and necessary support for immigrant students and families. I do believe they deserve more recognition and support because they are real heroes and heroines underpinning our communities and students in need. So to wrap up my presentation today, as I mentioned this book's objectives earlier, I hope our book and our research findings can highlight students and children who have been invisible in our society. The absence of immigration policy to protect those students have affected the entire school community in an extensive way, particularly the nation's most challenged and under-resourced schools, where many immigrant students are concentrated. And I believe now is the time, now more than ever, we need to drive our message home on our priorities for Congress and policymakers to ensure a fair and equal education for all students. Congress is now moving forward with the big budget. Congress will be taking the next step to decide the priorities. And I hope our research findings can be used as compelling evidence to advance discussions around immigration. At the same time, while discussions are important, I also hope to see actions taking place immediately to ensure educational rights of millions of students and children in the nation. Thank you. I think that's it. That's the end of the presentation. And yeah, and I would be happy to be engaged with our participants in the Q&A session. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. E. That was such a powerful and beautiful presentation. That was really lovely. But I have to say that my favorite takeaway was the quote, "Let's remove the adults from the picture." Boy, that really said a lot to me. So thank you so much. So we're going to have our little chat, and we're going to bring Patricia Gándara back. So if she wants to come back, there you go. And we have some questions that our team prepared for you. And so I'm going to just start throwing them out, and you guys can answer as you wish. So immigration enforcement also impacts non-immigrant students. I assume that the whole system of the classroom and the school feels the impact. Can you talk a little about this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as the Fatima Abelica Gonzalez case shows, it's not uncommon, when we have students like that, in our classroom and in our school, it affects other students and educators, who are supposed to be with her, mentally, emotionally, and physically, So the impact of immigration enforcement actions and threats, it refers to educators and students, not just from immigrant families, and just everybody, in the classroom, with those immigrant students or, students from immigrant families who can be affected by the remnant of immigration enforcement actions. So I think our my presentation today and the findings that we presented in our book do highlight the ripple effect that everybody has been going through for the past years under the Trump administration's stepped up immigration actions. But it's not over, because we don't have the right and proper immigration system in place. So that's the thing, that we really want to highlight in our findings. But I think Dr. Gándara would want to comment on this as well.
I would just add to that the finding, and we have a whole chapter in the book on this, about the impact of absenteeism on those students who feel threatened. There doesn't even have to be a raid. There's this constant sense of threat amongst these students, so that any kind of a rumor starts an avalanche of students leaving school and either disenrolling or being absent. And that has tremendous effects on everybody. Because when you start having students disenrolling, you are upsetting the classroom, the teacher can't teach, you're upsetting the budget of the school because their ADA, their average daily attendance goes down. And so I think your question, Rhonda, about the overall impact is a really important one, that this goes way beyond the kids who are targeted to the whole school and the teachers and their ability to teach.
Right, and it's not like it's not hard enough to teach a class to begin with. You know, we all know that that has so many challenges in itself. With this
Let me
additive.
add just one other thing, Rhonda,
Sure.
because there was an image that stayed with me throughout writing this book. And that was the empty desk, the empty chair. When the students file into the classroom and Jose or Maria is no longer there and they don't know what has happened to them. And this is their best friend. This is the student they've gone to school with for years. And the desk is empty. It's like an emptiness inside of the students themselves. You could just feel what that was like and how that affected the whole classroom.
Yeah, it's horrible. Thank you for that. It's very disturbing, but interesting and powerful image. You first published an article on the subject, as you mentioned, and then you decided to turn it into a book. Can you talk about that journey and what made you make that decision?
It's been quite a journey, actually. After we collected educator data in 2017 and 18, we worked on a journal article right away, and the article came out in 2019 in the American Educational Research Journal, which targets professionals in working in academia, like researchers, scholars, and professors. So even though it was a meaningful achievement in publication, we wanted to reach out to a large audience so that we can deliver this message to as many people as possible, especially targeting policymakers and think tank researchers and staff, who are working on, policy issues, as well as educators, across the nation, so that, we can deliver a message that you are not alone. You are with other educators, working on this topic, together, working hand in hand with immigrant families and students across the nation throughout the network. So we embarked on a journey to work on the book project. And we first got the invitation from Harvard Education Press, and we were really excited that because we already thought about the next step, how to reach out to a large audience. So we collected additional data. We interviewed superintendents, principals, and administrators in many parts of the nation. And it came out finally. So and I'm hoping that we can reach out to more policymakers at this moment, because this is a really important piece of everyday evidence and information they can leverage to move the discussions forward about immigration. So hopefully they can use our book and evidence to advance discussions around it.
And as I told you before we started the program today, that in reading the book, I found it so accessible and just so easy to read and to understand. And you guys did really such a great job with this book.
Thank you. Yeah, we really wanted to refrain from using any kind of jargons related
Mhm.
to advanced statistical methodology we used. I didn't talk about anything about the data sets today, but we actually took advantage of a large data set from National Center for Education Statistics on top of our education survey, educators survey we collected. So we used really high level statistical methodology to analyze the data, but we didn't talk about anything in the book, so that we can
Mhm.
make this message more readable and deliverable.
Yeah, you really did a fine job. So at the end of the book, you give very wise and practical suggestions about how to better the immigrant children's plight. You write, educators have power. Is it true? And is it enough? So in terms of like maybe unions, collective action, what do you think about that?
I do think they have a power, and especially collective group, they can be more powerful. But we really need to think about the sacrifice that educators have made, especially for the past months, as we're dealing with the pandemic situation as well. I mean, I don't know, we kind of tend to take educators' sacrifice for granted. But we need to make more, compensation and support system, for educators who are doing a lot of jobs. And even though they are powerful, they're at the end of the day, they are human beings. So there should be more support system in place to help educators to address this kind of issues in a more systemic way and in a proper way as well,
Mhm.
so that they can serve their students and their families in a proper way, especially for those educators working in really challenging schools like Title I schools, in challenging communities. They have they are lacking so many things in terms of human resource and a lot of the material resources they need to teach and help their students. But we need to make more support for our educators and help them in a systemic way.
Do we need a million educators march on Washington?
Look, that'd be
That'd be
great.
exciting.
Yeah. With mask on. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that wouldn't hurt. But we also know from a lot of survey data that parents tend to be very supportive of teachers. When there are issues between school districts and teachers, parents will generally go to the side of the teachers. So if teachers stand up and say, this is untenable, this
Mhm.
cannot go on, I think a lot of people would listen very carefully to that message.
Well, and I think you're hearing that a little bit with the mask mandates now. Teachers are, in school districts are really saying, no, it's important to wear masks. So
Absolutely.
hopefully, yeah, that's an example. So in chapter 7 of your book, you say, quote, contrary to what we had thought, the political slant of the state in which the district was located, red state or blue state, did not make much difference with respect to the support and services provided to immigrant students and their families. Were there other surprising findings that you had while writing this book or researching this book?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the red and blue state split, I mean, it was kind of a surprising finding to me. But if we mull over, this in an in-depth way, it actually makes sense. As I stressed the findings several times in my presentation, an overwhelming percentage of students who have been affected by immigration issues, they're U.S. citizen children. So it is the school leaders and district leaders' jobs, to keep those students safe and help them, receive a fair education. So those students deserve it. And as one superintendent's comments I shared in the presentation shows, if we erase the adults or politics in the school context, I think that's your favorite part. It gets clear, children and students, they must be the priority, and the rest of the issues, it comes later. So
Yeah. It's I think it's hopeful if there's, if people would just focus on the children.
Mhm.
So in your research, did the issue of healthcare for family members come up? So in other words, are there, and I think you did actually mention this in your presentation about additional stress, maybe like caregiving or when children have to become the parent. So are there additional stressors related to immigration enforcement that you encountered in your conversations with teachers and administrators?
Well, when it comes to healthcare issue, although I didn't talk about during my presentations today, the majority of immigrant students, they go to high poverty schools in the United States. So using a proxy variable, we used English learners because schools and districts, they can't collect any information about immigration status. So using a proxy variable, English learners, we analyzed the civil rights data collection, and about 80% of Latino English learners, they go to mid to high poverty schools, where more than half of the students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So it's very common, to find the numerous multi-layered, challenges affecting these students' educational experiences, plus health-related issues as well. And the issues have been exacerbated due to the pandemic crisis. So I think there needs to be more, discussions around this, to help, those families and students who need more support when it comes to healthcare issue or, other educational, resources, things like that. But yeah, so it has been mentioned several times, and we do, realize the importance of the issue.
Right. Yeah. Based on your research, and this is probably the key question, what advice would you give to the new administration? Do you intend to follow up on your research under a new administration?
Well, as the way, I wrapped up my presentation, I really want, the current administration to move on, especially, when they have a serious discussion about how to make priorities, using the big budget, that should be coming up, very soon. I want them to prioritize, the immigration issue and, the fair and equal education for immigrant students. And to do that, we need to extend our conversations by, including, their parents' immigration status as well. I know it's a very sensitive topic, but we need to, really address, the issue at this moment. Otherwise, there is going to be no time, for us to do that. And I think Dr. Gándara, may want to say more, about this as well.
Yeah, I would just add that at the Civil Rights Project, Proyecto de Derechos Civiles, we have a motto, and that motto is, we don't do harmless research. So the research that we do is done for equity purposes. And so what Joy did not tell you is that today, yesterday, tomorrow, we're very actively engaged in getting the book into the hands of the staff members in the Congress, on individuals who are advocates and NGOs working with immigrants. We are pushing this book out widely so that it can in fact be used as evidence for why we need better immigration policy.
Excellent, excellent. Did you hand Joe Biden one when he was here in the state yesterday?
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't get to Long Beach yesterday, but
And
we'll
I think
see that folks get it.
And I think Dr. Gándara just brought up, really important, part of our educational research, what direction, we need to go, I mean, I have been in academia for a decade, I know this is just, short experience, compared to many professors and colleagues, including Dr. Gándara, who are joining this event. But I have felt, like, there's kind of a gap, between the educational research and the next step, we need to make, especially, to push, political discussions forward, and how to help immigrants, how to help students and educators in a proper way, leveraging educational research as evidence, as useful information. But I think there is kind of a gap, between those two arenas. And I think our next approach will be really meaningful, because we really want to hand our book, in the findings, to people, who need those pieces
Absolutely.
of information. So I'm kind of learning, the process and step, we need to make, and I'm excited.
It's all very exciting. Okay, so let's, do you see that the evidence or immigration challenge, the education or immigration challenge, is doing to teaching what COVID is doing to nurses? So by that, I mean specifically as it relates to burnout, lack of control, exodus of staff, ignoring signs of crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I showed today, I think that's the evidence to your questions. I mean, many educators, they felt stressed, overworked, drained, and exhausted, and it's even before the pandemic started, right? Half of them, a lot of educators, especially working with students from low-income families and immigrant families, they are supposed to be dealing with additional work every day, and it's just so much work. And we can't let this, happen, just for a long term, it's impossible. So we need to really make some actions to support, those educators and students at the same time. But absolutely, yeah. I mean, educators, they have been affected in many ways when it comes to teaching, supporting, their students, talking to, their parents as well, and working with, their colleagues. So everything has been affected in a profound way.
Right. Even in normal times, teachers have been the psychologists, the babysitters, the social workers, the groundskeepers. They have so much put on them. It's always amazes me. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have a lot of students in the audience, I'm sure. And are there corollaries for college students or administrators based on your research? So for the college side of that.
Well, I'm not sure, but
well, in terms of like, maybe do we feel that the immigration problems have seeped into the college, university? And I'm sure they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned in my presentation, we do have a DACA recipients, on our campus, and I have some students, who went through the DACA program. Now, they are activists in different schools, working with students from immigrant families and helping them, keep their education going on, so I do think, there is kind of a deep, correlation, and some connections between this issue in colleges and universities. So yeah.
We also know that we have quite a number of DACA individuals who are teachers themselves, and who are really the front lines of working with these families and these children, because they understand those issues at a very deep level. And so there's a lot of concern widely about getting some kind of immigration status, legal status for DACA recipients generally, but especially when you think about all of the teachers that we could lose. It was hundreds and hundreds of teachers actually are DACA recipients.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In my final question for you is, in chapter 8, you talk about a university working with local schools to shield students from immigration. Can you tell us more about this? And were there other universities that you were aware of that did this without naming names?
Well, I think even though I didn't mention the sanctuary school modeling, which is one of our book chapters topics, there is a strong tie developed between UCLA Community School, which uses the sanctuary school modeling, in the heart of Koreatown in Los Angeles, they have developed a strong connection with UCLA Law School, and they also have UCLA School Community Law Clinic, which support a lot of students and parents who are dealing with immigration status and other issues related to immigration. So it's a very tangible, solution for helping those students and families, immigrant families. And I do think, there could be other examples, but we actually, LMU Law School, they offer law
was thinking
clinic
that
as
too.
well. Yeah, even though they don't have connection with local, school communities or districts, but they do offer some kind of a legal support for those who need, consultation or things like that about their immigration status and immigration issues. So we're doing a great job, and I hope other universities and colleges, they can offer kind of a similar service who need those immigration consultation in service.
Great.
And Dr.
That's-
Gándara, do you know any other universities or colleges?
I do actually, but I think that it's very important to note, and you see that in chapter 8. I'm trying to remember, or chapter 9, that a number of the school districts, the personnel that we spoke to in districts, were relying heavily on partner universities for providing all kinds of services, psychological services, tutoring for the kids, social services, and their schools of social work, schools of dental, medical, law were actually providing services to these families. It was breathtaking, actually,
How
the
wonderful.
degree to which folks in universities and other places had just really come to help these kids.
Yeah, that's great. Talk about hope. Yeah, that's wonderful. So let's see what some of the people in the audience are saying. So Isabel Clay says, were there any differences across predictors in levels of stress? That is, were teachers or administrators, in particular, geographic locations of particular racial, ethnic backgrounds, of particular genders, more associated with high levels of stress? I'm wondering if different teachers might be carrying a larger share of the emotional load, and if so, which ones?
So hi, Isabel. I think she's my previous student, actually.
Yeah, good question.
When it comes to educators, ethnic and racial information and background, we didn't collect, their ethnic and racial information because it's kind of sensitive topic, and we wanted to respect their privacy when they shared, this kind of experiences with us. So we didn't collect any personal information related to educators' demographics, but we merged our data from, again, National Center for Education Statistics, a common core of data, where we were able to dig into school level student information. So we were able to connect the data with the percentage of African American students, Latinx students, white students, Asian students, things like that at the school level. And we were able to identify some kind of differences and variations from region to region. So we actually did some regional variation differences in our data. And there's kind of difference, going on, for one reason to the other reason for sure, but it's, I would say it's, hard to generalize the findings because we collected the data in a kind of targeted way, focusing on some schools, where, there is more immigrant students and Hispanic students, because we knew that, that's the place, where we were able to collect data. But I think for Isabel, I would recommend, she read my ERJ article, which delivers really extensive information about that. But thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that she's here with me.
Yeah, I will add
Excellent.
to that was a great question.
Yeah, it was.
And it really remains in our minds, that question.
Mhm.
But when you're doing this kind of research, you have to weigh a number of things. If we had asked people to tell us their gender, their ethnicity, things of this sort, they could be identifiable. As soon as somebody is identifiable, they're going to be less reluctant to be forthcoming with the comments that they make. So you have to weigh all of this. And particularly those individuals in red states who were surrounded by anti-immigrant thinking, this could put people at risk even. So we had to be careful about not identifying people and not asking for that level of information,
Yeah.
although we would love to have it.
It's a very good point. Very good point. So Ileana Chen asks, is there a statistic on how often educators would contact ICE if they suspected a student to be undocumented? Is it really alarming that there are educators who would do this? How should an educator act or respond if they find out that one of their colleagues is taking this type of action? Wow.
Well, I wish I could know about this, but no, I don't think there is statistics collecting this kind of information or data. Yeah, I don't think they could collect data about that.
Do you have any just advice on how should an educator act if they find one of their colleagues taking this type of action? Is that
Well,
even
I
an
mean,
askable question?
yeah, in one of our chapters, we mentioned we need more professional development, and we need to provide a more appropriate, information package to educators, because a lot of educators, they just don't know, how to deal with the situation.
Right.
And as Dr. Gándara just mentioned, we have a variety of educators and having, I mean, in terms of their, political, standpoints, their religious standpoints and everything. So, so it's quite mixed, in reality, we have, really different types of educators out there. But as long as there is kind of a straightforward and transparent guidelines that is delivered from State Department of Education or, districts, that's it. They need to do A, B, and C, when it comes to, certain, issues happening to them. But we need more professional development about that. But unfortunately, there is no, aligned, information or instruction about that. So hopefully, more district and state Department of Education can address this issue in a collective way. But what we found in our data and findings, a lot of school districts and schools, they just rely on and depend on, community-based organizations or local, immigration organizations advocating for students from immigrant families or immigrant parents. So there is limited information out there, at the institutional level.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, another question. Jason Bostic asks, thank you for documenting these devastating effects. Do you anticipate revisiting any of your subjects over time to track the long-term effects of ICE enforcement policies? Good question.
Well, I should say that I need a break because I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it was a really painful, to
I bet.
go over, this data, because when Dr. Gándara and I analyzed and went over, thousands of comments, we were really, I mean, there are so many, breakdown moments, we had, when we went over, those comments. But I do think that, we need to revisit this topic, sometime soon. And when it comes to ICE enforcement policies, actually, one of the chapters, in D.N. Murphy's chapter, they have tracking down, the local police and ICE relationships and how that affects school communities, especially in low-income communities, when it comes to student total enrollment, things like that. So there is a kind of quantitative way, to track down, that impact, through the data. But we also need to collect, more data from educators, and how that has affected, their students, school communities, and educators themselves over time. But yeah, it's a really important topic we need to follow up. But not at this moment.
I think we can understand to have a little break.
Yeah.
Because it is such a devastating topic, so I totally understand that.
Yeah, and Dr. Gándara, you have comments on this as well?
Well, no, I think you covered it. We're tracking very closely on what's happening across the country with respect to immigration enforcement. And we know that, for example, although the Biden administration is totally different than the last administration, there are still deportations and detentions going on. And there are still families and children who are, found in the midst of this situation. And we're not really going to have a solution until we have a solution, until we actually have some immigration reform that takes into account the needs of these children. So we're continuing to monitor it. I don't know what the next step is yet. Joy and I will have to discuss that. But yeah, we needed a bit of a break.
So a question that I had was, how long do you think it will seriously take to change the system? I mean, are we looking at years, decades?
I think it really depends on who's in the administration and the Congress. If we can hold on to the Congress with the Democratic Congress, and we have Democrats in the White House, I mean, there is a strong desire to fix this. But if we lose the Congress, God knows, we may be looking at decades more going on like this.
Right. And even with Democrats in the Congress and the White House, it's such a large problem. I mean, as you've shown, there are so many pieces to this problem. It is, while it is a lot of laws and policies, there's just so much for the on the ground teaching and teachers, and how much is put on them, that also there's a lot of problems, flaws in the education systems that also need to be, I think, worked on.
Yeah, we've identified a lot of these things, but if you stand back and you look at an even bigger picture out there, one of the things that we haven't talked about is the fact that we actually need immigrants in this country. We are below population replacement. If we didn't have immigrants, we would be shrinking as a country and shrinking as an economy. We desperately need these young people who we are denying an equitable education to get that education so they can be part of this country. And so there's a big picture out there too, that even conservatives who may have conservative views about immigration policy have to consider, if we do this to our immigrant families, it's at our own peril.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues that many people find the immigration topic kind of overwhelming is they kind of tend to mix everything, happening in our communities and happening at the border, or happening, in an international context at the same time. But as I mentioned in my presentation, once we really focus on, what's happening in our communities, for those who have lived here, and raised their children and have their children, over decades, And I think the issue gets more simpler because we are talking about, what is happening in our communities and how that affects students and educators in our school communities. We're not talking about, anything at the border, or, in an international context, things like that. But I think we tackle on this issue kind of piece by piece, making more, tangible priorities. I think we can make more approachable, solutions in terms of that.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a large, horrible situation. And I thank you both for really illustrating this issues and all the moving pieces and parts of this. And it is such a timely and powerful issue. I really thank you for this book because it really was very enlightening. And I hope everybody will pick it up and read it, especially if they live in Washington, D.C. or work in Congress. So I would like to thank both Dr. E and Dr. Gándara, sorry, for coming to Faculty Pub Night and sharing this important publication with us all. Such a great start to our fall semester's library programming. We certainly appreciate that. And once again, for all of you, the title of their book is Schools Under Siege: The Impact of Immigration Enforcement on Educational Equity. I'd also like to take a minute to thank Dean Christine Brancalini for the library, who always supports our library programming and is a constant joy to have her as a partner. So I want to thank you both again, and good luck. Good luck in
Thank
your
you. I would like
spreading the news.
I would like to thank you for including me in this and Joy's invitation to me to join her.
It was
And
a
for the
pleasure.
great questions that were asked.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
were really good questions.
Mhm.
It's only measured by great answers. So thank you very much also. And again, thank you for starting off the semester with a bang. This was just wonderful. We had so many participants here tonight. So thank you very, very much. And now, Dr. Joy, I'm going to let you run off to class. So, so thanks again. And we hope to see all of you next month for another wonderful Faculty Pub Night. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. Bye.
Bye.